The candlelit booth at Restaurant Luciano goes absolutely silent. 20 men in tailored suits, men who have buried people without blinking, men who have collected debts with baseball bats and broken fingers. These men freeze mid-breath as Sofia Morgan's palm connects with Matteo Calabrese's face. The crack echoes through the private room like a gunshot in a cathedral. Her hand, small and trembling, leaves a vivid red handprint across the jaw of the most dangerous man in Philadelphia. Matteo does not move. His face, carved from granite and scarred from temple to cheekbone, does not change. He sits there in his black silk shirt, the kind that costs more than Sofia's entire monthly rent, and he accepts the blow like a man receiving a benediction. His men do not know what to do. Rocco, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, reaches for the pistol beneath his jacket but stops. His hand hovers frozen in the space between decision and action. Franco, standing by the door with his expensive cashmere coat draped across his arm, takes one step forward then retreats. Both men look to their boss for the signal. The signal that will end her life in this room, quietly, efficiently, never to be spoken of again. Sofia stands trembling before him, her delivery jacket still wet from the August rain, the fabric clinging to her ribs. Her left eye is swollen shut, the socket a constellation of purple and yellow bruises. Around her throat, 5 dark handprints mark her skin like a necklace of violence. Her hands are shaking so badly she has to clench them into fists to keep them still. But she does not step back. She does not apologize. She does not beg. Matteo raises one hand. Just one hand, fingers spreading open in a gesture so small that only his men would understand its meaning. Stop. Do nothing. Stand down. The temperature in the room shifts like the sky before a storm. 20 pairs of eyes watch him, waiting. The candlelight flickers across expensive silverware, across wine glasses holding Barolo that costs $300 a bottle, across the faces of men who have forgotten what it feels like to be shocked by anything. The rain hammers against the restaurant windows. Thunder rolls across Philadelphia like a warning. Matteo's jaw clenches. The red handprint on his face darkens. He stares at Sofia Morgan, this woman who arrived in his life 3 nights ago soaked in rain and desperation, this woman who has no idea that her single act of defiance has just shattered something in him that has been locked sealed for 15 years. He does not speak. His voice, when it finally comes, is quiet as a prayer. Deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Leave us. The men file out without a word. Rocco's jaw works silently. Franco's fingers twitch. But they obey. They always obey. Within 90 seconds, the private booth is empty except for 2 people breathing in the candlelit silence, the thunder rolling overhead, and the weight of everything that is about to change. Sofia has $200 in her jacket pocket. That money is supposed to last her for more days before her paycheck arrives. She has a final notice letter in her bag, stamped in red capital letters, telling her that she owes $300,000 in debt to a man named Harold Brennan. $300,000. She makes $15 an hour delivering food on a broken scooter through Philadelphia's August nights. The math is simple. The math is impossible. The math is a death sentence. She does not know why she slapped him. She does not know what she expected to happen. Maybe she expected his men to shoot her. Maybe that would have been easier than continuing to live like this, continuing to carry this weight, continuing to be hunted by a man who has already broken 3 of her ribs and left her coughing blood into the sink at 4 in the morning. But what she could never have known, what no amount of desperation could have prepared her for, is that Matteo Calabrese has been watching her for 3 nights. He has been watching her refuse to cry even as her body shakes. He has been watching her hold herself together with the strength of a woman who stopped expecting mercy a very long time ago. And in this moment, with her hand still raised and trembling, she reminds him of someone he has not thought about in 15 years. Someone he buried in a cemetery in the rain and never allowed himself to remember until right now. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone you love and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Now let us rewind, to 3 nights earlier, to a broken scooter on a rain-slicked highway where everything began to change. The night was suffocating. August in Philadelphia wraps around you like a wet cloth, steals the air from your lungs, makes every breath feel like you are drowning on dry land. Sofia Morgan's scooter had been making a terrible sound all evening, a grinding noise that meant money she did not have. The engine ceased at mile marker 41 on the northeast extension, just as the storm rolled in from the west. Lightning cracked the sky open. Rain fell in sheets so thick she could barely see the highway markers in front of her face. She stood beside the scooter in the downpour, soaked through, her hair plastered against her skull, her red delivery jacket already stained with grease and coffee and the unmistakable smell of a night shift ending in failure. The scooter cost $600 when she bought it 3 years ago. She had paid $200. The remaining $400 still hung over her head like a debt that would never be forgiven. There was no cell phone in her pocket. She had cancelled the service 6 weeks ago because she could not afford the $60 monthly payment. There was only the wet leather of her wallet containing 2 credit cards maxed out to their limits, a library card, and a photograph of Noah when he was 4 years old, his birthday cake lit with 5 candles, his smile wide as the world. The sound of engines approached through the rain. Heavy engines. Multiple vehicles. Sofia turned to see a convoy of black SUVs moving slowly down the highway in her direction. The lead vehicle slowed. A window descended. She could not see the man inside, only the silhouette of his head, the glint of something silver catching the lightning. A voice called out. Male. Measured. You need help. It was not a question. Sofia's instinct was to say no. To tell him she was fine, that help was already on the way, that she did not need anything from a stranger with expensive vehicles and the kind of power that moves through a city like a shadow. But she was so tired. She was so cold. And the next delivery shift would cost her gas money she did not have, and Noah needed new shoes, and the eviction notice had been slipped under her apartment door 3 days ago with a date circled in red. She walked to the window. The man inside was 6'2", shoulders broad enough to fill the entire back seat of the SUV. His suit was black, his shirt open at the neck showing the bare expanse of his chest. His face was a study in controlled power, every line of it sculpted by someone who had decided long ago that softness was a luxury he could not afford. A scar ran from his right eye down to his cheekbone, white and thin like a blade. His eyes were dark. Not black. Dark like the deepest part of the ocean, the part where sunlight cannot reach. He was the most beautiful and the most frightening thing Sofia had ever seen. My name is Matteo, he said. His voice carried the weight of an accent buried so deep that most people would miss it. Get in the vehicle. She should have said no. Every instinct screaming from her bones should have propelled her in the opposite direction. But she thought of Noah asleep in her mother's apartment, her mother who had already taken him in twice when the rent came due and Sofia could not make it. She thought of the eviction notice. She thought of the man named Harold Brennan who had been leaving messages on her old mother's answering machine, his voice dripping with the kind of cruelty that suggests he does not see her as human anymore. She got in the vehicle. The interior smelled like expensive leather and something else she could not name. Ambition, maybe. The kind of wealth that permeates everything it touches. 2 men sat in the front seats. Rocco drove. Franco rode beside him. Neither turned to look at her. Matteo gestured to the seat across from him, and she sat, still dripping rain onto the leather upholstery that probably cost more than everything she owned combined. What is your name? He said. Sofia Morgan. What is your name and why are you on the northeast extension at 11:47 at night delivering food from a broken scooter? She told him. She told him about the delivery job that paid $15 an hour. She told him about Noah, about her mother, about the apartment that was going to be locked down by the county in 72 hours. She told him about Harold Brennan, and when she said that name, something changed in Matteo's face. A muscle tightened in his jaw. His hand, resting on his thigh, closed into a fist. This man, Brennan. What does he want from you? Sofia pulled the letter from her soaked jacket pocket. It was falling apart, the paper disintegrating, the red final notice stamp running like blood in the rain. $300,000. She owed a man named Harold Brennan $300,000, and she had no memory of how this debt had begun. Her ex-partner, a man she had lived with for 2 years before he showed his true nature, had apparently borrowed money from Brennan for a business venture that never materialized. Then he had left Sofia with the debt. Matteo read the letter without speaking. When he handed it back to her, his hands were shaking. "Pack a bag," he said. "Take your son. You are not going back to that apartment." Outside the vehicle, the rain fell like a curse. The lightning continued to tear the sky open. Thunder rolled across the city like the approach of something inevitable. Sofia did not know that this moment, this conversation in a black SUV on a rain-soaked highway, had just divided her life into before and after. She did not know that Matteo Calabrese had spent 15 years building an empire specifically because he was terrified of ever being helpless again. And she did not know that the man sitting across from her, the most powerful person in Philadelphia, had just decided to tear down everything he had built to protect her. The scooter would remain on the highway, abandoned and useless. The phone would ring in a maintenance supervisor's office at midnight, and by morning the vehicle would be towed to a junkyard where nobody would ever see it again. 3 nights later, Sofia would stand in a private restaurant booth and slap the face of the man who saved her, because she still did not understand that sometimes the smallest act of defiance against cruelty is the most powerful force in the room. Thunder rolled. Rain fell. And the black SUVs drove deeper into the night, carrying Sofia Morgan toward a life she could never have imagined, toward a man who would reshape the entire city to protect her, and toward a moment of reckoning that was already beginning to move through the streets like a storm approaching land. 3 nights before the slap, before the silence shattered like glass, before everything changed, Sofia Morgan sat on the shoulder of Interstate 95 with rain streaming down her face and a phone at 3% battery. The thunderstorm had come fast. One moment the August air was thick and humid, pressing down on the city like a hand, and the next the sky split open and the world became nothing but water and noise. Lightning forked across the darkness. Her scooter, a 2009 Vespa that she had named Stella in a moment of desperate optimism, had made a sound like a dying animal and simply stopped moving. She was 26 years old and had completed 14 food deliveries that night. Her delivery bag, branded with the logo of a restaurant that paid her $7 per hour plus tips, contained 3 soggy containers of organic pasta primavera meant for a mansion in Rittenhouse Square. The cardboard was disintegrating. The receipt showed she would earn another $4 if anyone answered the door. $73 in tips sat in her jacket pocket. She needed $300,000 in 72 hours. Sofia sat on the wet asphalt with her nursing textbooks, which were now soaked through their plastic covering. Her organic chemistry exam was in 2 days. The exam would determine whether she could enter the nursing program at Temple University. The nursing program was the only pathway she could see to a life that did not involve counting coins to decide between bus fare and food. She held a flashcard under the flickering light of a street lamp. The bulb was dying, casting everything in a sickly yellow that made the world look like a photograph of somewhere she did not belong. Electronegativity, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible beneath the sound of water crashing against the roadway. The ability of an atom to attract electrons in a chemical bond. She did not hear the vehicles at first. The rain was too loud. The thunder was too loud. The sound of her own shaking breath was too loud. Then headlights cut through the darkness. 4 of them. Paired, precise, moving in formation. The convoy of black SUVs slowed as it approached the shoulder. The vehicles were enormous, each one worth more than everything Sofia owned combined. The windows were tinted so dark that you could not see inside them, which meant they could see everything about her, soaked through, shivering, clutching a textbook like it was a prayer. The 3rd vehicle in the line stopped. The back door opened. Inside sat a man who radiated controlled violence the way other people radiated warmth. He was 41 years old, though something in his eyes suggested he had lived longer than that. His hair was dark with silver threading through it like moonlight on water. He wore a three-piece suit in charcoal grey, the fabric so fine it seemed to drink the light. An open white shirt revealed the hollow of his throat, and on his left wrist sat a watch that cost more than a year of Sofia's rent. His name was Matteo Calabrese. "Inside," he said. Not a question. Not a request. A single word, steady as a verdict. Sofia hesitated. The rain hammered down. Her phone was dying. She had no idea who this man was, which meant every instinct told her to run. But she was wearing a soaked delivery jacket, holding a calculus textbook, and sitting on the side of a highway during a thunderstorm. Running was not an option that existed for her anymore. She stood on shaking legs and climbed into the vehicle. The interior of the SUV was the color of cream leather and controlled climate. The air was warm. It smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something like old wood and power. Water dripped from her jacket onto seats that probably cost more than a semester of tuition. The man, Matteo, did not react to the water. He simply watched her with eyes the color of storm clouds, the kind of eyes that had looked at other people making terrible decisions and never felt the need to stop them. His driver was a man named Rocco, broad-shouldered, with a neck that suggested he had spent time as a fighter before becoming a chauffeur. The passenger seat held Franco, who had a scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like someone had once tried to cut his face in half and he had survived. The vehicles began moving again, flowing back into traffic like water returning to a stream. Silence filled the interior of the SUV. The kind of silence that has weight. Sofia sat as far from Matteo as the space allowed, pressed against the opposite door, her soaked textbooks clutched to her chest. He did not speak. He simply watched her with the patient attention of someone who was used to watching people reveal who they were through their own discomfort. Finally, he asked, "What are you studying?" His voice was deep and solid like an oath. It carried the faint accent of someone whose family had come from somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere with old stone and older traditions. Sofia looked at her textbooks. She looked at the man beside her. She made a decision that would divide her life into before and after. "Nursing," she said. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "Night classes at Temple University. I'm trying to get into the program." Matteo nodded once, a movement so small it was barely visible. "My mother was a nurse," he said. The convoy drove deeper into the city. The rain began to ease, though the thunder continued to roll across the night like something ancient and inevitable. The streets grew wider, more manicured. They passed through neighborhoods where the houses sat back from the road behind iron gates, where the grass was green and trimmed and perfect, where people did not sit on sidewalks and wait for help. 15 years ago, Matteo Calabrese had stood in a hospital room on a night exactly like this. The rain had hammered the windows. His wife, Elena, had squeezed his hand so hard she had nearly broken his fingers. And then the doctor had come in with a face that told him everything he needed to know before the words left the man's mouth. His son, Noah, had been born at 11:11 in the evening. He had stopped breathing at 11:52. In the 5 minutes between those two times, Matteo had learned what it felt like to be completely powerless. He had learned that money could not buy breath into lungs. He had learned that violence could not strike death into retreating. He had learned that all the power he would ever accumulate could not change a single fact about the universe, that his son had lived for 5 minutes and then he had not. After that night, Matteo had built an empire. He had done it methodically, deliberately, with the single-minded focus of a man constructing a fortress against helplessness. He had built it so that he would never again have to stand beside someone he loved and watch them break. And then, 15 years later, he had seen a woman sitting on the side of a highway in the rain, soaked through, studying organic chemistry because she was trying to build a life out of nothing, and something in his chest had cracked open like an egg. The convoy pulled up to Restaurant Luciano on Walnut Street. The restaurant was all white tablecloths and soft lighting, the kind of place where the wine cost more than a bottle than Sofia made in a week. The kind of place where Matteo kept a permanent table in a private booth in the back, where his men knew to sit 3 tables away, where conversations happened in low voices and nobody ever asked questions. Matteo climbed out of the vehicle. He did not offer Sofia his hand, but he did not need to. She understood that she was to follow him inside. The restaurant owner appeared the moment the door opened. He was a thin man in his 60s, with a pencil-thin mustache and eyes that had learned to see without really looking. "Signor Calabrese," he said, bowing slightly. "Your table is ready." "We will need dry towels," Matteo said. "And blankets. Whatever is warm." The owner's eyes flicked to Sofia, assessed her situation in a single glance, and nodded without comment. They were seated in the private booth at the back of the restaurant. Rocco and Franco positioned themselves at a nearby table, their backs to the wall, their eyes never stopping their work of watching. Matteo sat across from Sofia, his suit impeccable, his hands folded on the table in front of him. An elderly waitress appeared with towels that were warm and soft. Sofia dried her face and her hair as best she could. Her textbooks were beyond salvation. The pages were warped and the binding was cracked. Hours of study notes were bleeding together into illegible smears of ink. "You will not need those," Matteo said, watching her look at the destroyed books. Sofia looked up. "My exam is in 2 days. Then you will have new books. And you will have a tutor if you need one. Someone who knows organic chemistry." He paused. He seemed to be choosing his words very carefully, the way a man might choose his words when stepping across a line he had sworn never to cross. "You will have whatever you need." Sofia did not ask why. She had learned long ago not to ask questions when someone was offering help. Questions meant complications. Complications meant the help would disappear. But what she did not know was that Matteo Calabrese had made a decision in those 5 minutes in the hospital room all those years ago, that if he ever found someone helpless on a night like this, someone fighting to build something good out of nothing, he would not hesitate. He would not calculate the cost. He would not pull the black SUVs past and let the rain do its work. She also did not know that her ex-boyfriend, Harold Brennan, was moving through the city at that exact moment. Harold, who had borrowed $300,000 from a very specific person to finance a business venture that never materialized. Harold, who had then left Philadelphia for 3 years, taking none of the money with him, leaving behind the entire debt. Harold, who had just returned to the city because he had finally figured out who to collect from. Sofia sat in the private booth of Restaurant Luciano with a man she did not know, eating food she had never tasted before, and tried not to think about the $73 in her jacket pocket, and the $200 at home, and the $300,000 she owed. She did not know that Harold would walk through the front door of this restaurant in exactly 72 hours. She did not know that she would stand up and slap him across the face in front of 20 people, shattering the silence of the private booth. She did not know that this moment in a black SUV on a rain-soaked highway, had divided her life into before and after. The rain continued to fall outside the restaurant windows. The lightning had moved away, and the thunder was growing distant. But somewhere in the city, a man was moving toward his reckoning, and he did not yet understand that the woman who would destroy him had just entered the protection of someone far more dangerous. The candlelight flickered against the red walls of Restaurant Luciano, casting shadows that danced like they were alive. Sofia sat in the private booth at the back, still wearing her wet delivery jacket, still holding the weight of everything she carried, the nursing textbooks in her bag, the $200 that needed to last 14 more days, the bruises she was learning to hide beneath her collar. Matteo Calabrese sat across from her, a man whose suit cost more than 3 months of her rent, asking questions about her exams as if he had nothing more important to occupy his time. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "What are you studying for?" "Pharmacology," she said quietly. "The section on drug interactions." He nodded slowly, genuinely listening in a way that made her uncomfortable. No one listened to Sofia Morgan anymore. She was the invisible girl on the scooter, the one who delivered food at 3 in the morning, the one whose name was sometimes misspelled on paychecks. The door to the private booth opened without knocking. Marco Calabrese entered like he owned the space, which, in his mind, he did. 28 years old, face soft with money, wrists heavy with a gold Rolex that caught the light. His suit was designer, his shoes Italian leather, his confidence the kind that came from being born into power rather than earning it. His eyes found Sofia immediately and stayed there, moving slowly across her face like he was cataloguing something he intended to take. "Uncle," Marco said, sliding into the booth uninvited, forcing Franco to shift sideways. "Who is this?" Matteo's voice dropped 10 degrees. "A guest. A guest." Marco smiled like this was funny. He leaned forward, his cologne thick and suffocating, and Sofia realized he was the type of predator who did not bother with stealth. "You are very pretty for a delivery girl. What time do you get off work?" Sofia did not answer. She set her spoon down slowly, every movement deliberate. Marco continued anyway. "I could use someone like you. My uncle here, he is getting soft in his age. Maybe you could deliver something special to my penthouse tonight? Something beyond the usual menu." His laugh was sharp, intentional, meant to wound. She stood to leave. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, not gently. "I was not finished talking." The room changed. It was not loud. There were no raised voices, no threats spoken in fury. Matteo's voice cracked like a whip, each word separate and final. "Remove your hand." Marco released her but laughed again, the sound hollow and desperate. "She is nobody, uncle. Why do you care? She delivers food on a broken scooter. She probably lives in a basement somewhere. Why would you?" "Leave," Matteo said. Marco left. The silence that followed was enormous. Sofia remained standing, her wrist burning where his fingers had been. Matteo looked at her with an expression she could not name, something that held both fury and something softer beneath it. "Rocco will drive you home tonight. And there will be money waiting at your apartment tomorrow. For the scooter repair." "I can't accept that," Sofia whispered. "You can and you will." She did accept it. The next morning, her scooter arrived at her apartment building, freshly repaired, with a note that said, "Paid in full, MC." Beneath the note were 5 $100 bills. What she did not know, in that moment of relief, was that Marco had been watching her for 2 weeks. He had hired investigators to dig through every detail of her life, her ex-boyfriend, her debts, her desperate financial situation. He had found Harold Brennan in a detention facility and made him an offer, $100,000 to bring Sofia to Restaurant Luciano on a specific night. He had explained his plan with the precision of a man who believed he could control outcomes. His uncle was becoming weak, soft, ruled by sentiment. A woman like Sofia could be leveraged. She could be used. She could be broken in front of witnesses, forcing Matteo to either protect her, revealing a vulnerability his enemies could exploit, or abandon her, proving that the old man's empire was crumbling from the inside. Marco had calculated everything except what happened when you underestimate a woman who had nothing left to lose. For days passed. Sofia worked triple shifts, studying until 3 in the morning with her eyes burning and her hands shaking from too much coffee and not enough sleep. She avoided the back entrance of her apartment building where Harold waited sometimes, where she had seen his car parked, where she knew he was counting the hours until the deadline arrived. It was 11 at night when he found her. The alley behind the convenience store smelled like rotting vegetables and spilled beer. Harold Brennan moved like a man who had spent his entire life collecting debts and breaking things. He was 35, with scarred knuckles and eyes that held no mercy because mercy was not profitable. His hand wrapped around her throat before she understood what was happening. "Where is my $300,000, Sofia?" She choked the words out. "I told you. My ex-boyfriend took out loans in my name. I did not sign anything. I did not know he was." His fist connected with her eye socket. Pain exploded white-hot and total. She crumpled against the brick wall, and he kicked her once in the ribs, not hard enough to break anything but hard enough to prove he could. 3 days, he said, his voice measured and quiet. 3 days or I find your sister. I find her at her school. I find her walking home and I explain to her what happens when people do not pay their debts. He left her bleeding on the asphalt. Her eye swelled purple and black within minutes. Her throat showed his handprints, bright red against her pale skin. She lay there in the filthy alley for a long time, breathing in shallow gasps, understanding with complete clarity that she was not going to survive this. There was no solution. There was no escape. There was only the mathematics of destruction, $300,000 she did not have, 3 days remaining, and a man who would hurt the people she loved. 2 nights later, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, "Come to Restaurant Luciano tonight. 8 p.m. MC." She should not have gone. Every survival instinct screamed at her to stay away, to disappear into the city, to take whatever violence Harold was offering rather than risk bringing it to Matteo's door. But she was exhausted, and she wanted to see his face one more time before everything collapsed. She wanted to return his $500 and cut the connection before Harold used it against her. She arrived in her delivery jacket, concealer failing to hide the bruises blooming across her throat. Matteo was in his private booth with Rocco and Franco, a business meeting, judging by the documents on the table and the grim expressions. When he looked up and saw her face, the entire world seemed to stop. He stood slowly. "Who did this to you?" She tried to brush it away. "I fell off my scooter." His eyes burned. "Do not lie to me." For the first time in 15 years, his men saw him move with gentleness. He pulled out her chair himself, poured water from a crystal pitcher into her glass, waited. His whole body was coiled tension, but his movements were careful, as if she might shatter. Finally, she broke. She told him everything. The ex-boyfriend, the loans in her name, Harold Brennan, the $300,000 debt, the final notice letter in her apartment, and the 3 days that remained before Harold followed through on his threats. Her hand shook as she showed him the letter, the official stamps, the amount that might as well have been $3 million. She had $200 left. She was not asking for help. She just came to return his money. She put the $500 on the table. Matteo did not touch it. Rocco and Franco exchanged glances, a look that said they had just witnessed something unprecedented in 15 years of service. 15 years ago, Matteo said quietly, "My wife Gabriella went into labor during a thunderstorm. We were 30 minutes from the hospital when she started hemorrhaging. I held her hand and I could do nothing, nothing at all. My son, Noah, was born silent. The doctors worked for 18 minutes trying to save him. I knelt on that hospital floor, the most powerful man in Philadelphia, completely helpless. Gabriella survived, but she left me 6 months later. She could not look at me without seeing a man who had failed to protect their child." Sofia's eyes filled with tears. "I have a nursery I never dismantled," he continued. "A name I never say aloud except to you now. And when I found you on that highway, soaked and terrified, I made a choice. I chose to be the man I should have been then. So I am asking you now, let me help you." She shook her head. "Why would you help me? I am nobody." He leaned forward, and his voice was like a blade wrapped in ice. "You are not nobody to me." The door to the booth opened. Victoria Ashford entered like she owned the restaurant and everyone in it. 48 years old, old money, the kind of woman who had never worked a day in her life but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had won 1,000 battles. Her dress cost more than Sofia's annual salary. Her jewelry was inherited. Her smile was a weapon. "Matteo, darling," she purred, ignoring Sofia entirely. "I heard you have been playing savior to strays again. Leave, Victoria. Does this one know what happened to the last girl you tried to rescue?" Victoria continued as if he had not spoken. 5 years ago. You brought her into your world, promised her protection, and your enemies used her as bait. She died in the crossfire. Shot 3 times. Victoria's eyes moved to Sofia with something that looked like pity but was actually cruelty wearing a mask. "You are a liability, sweetheart. And liabilities around Matteo Calabrese do not live long. She left the booth smiling. Sofia stood abruptly. I should not have come here. I should not have involved you in this. She did not know, in that moment of panic, that Marco was watching from across the street. She did not know that he had already called Harold Brennan with coordinates. She did not know that Victoria had installed cameras in the restaurant, high definition, perfectly positioned, feeding directly to her security system and her media connections. She did not know that everything was being recorded. She did not know that in exactly 72 hours, she would stand in this same booth and change everything. 3 nights later, her phone buzzed again. Come tonight. 8 p.m. We need to talk about Harold. She went because she had nowhere else to go. Harold Brennan was waiting in the parking lot. He grabbed her by her hair, actually grabbed her, right there in the open, like he no longer cared who saw, and dragged her into the restaurant. The private booth held 20 men. Matteo sat at the head of the table, and his lieutenants surrounded him, and every face turned when Harold shoved her inside and slammed the final notice letter on the table in front of Matteo. Your little girlfriend owes me $300,000, Harold said, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. You going to pay it, boss? Or is this girl about to learn what happens when you associate with someone who makes bad deals? The room went silent. Matteo looked at Sofia. She saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid weighing of consequences, the possible paths forward, the trap closing around them both. Sofia did something that no one in that room expected. She turned and slapped Harold Brennan across the face. The crack echoed through the booth like a gunshot. The crack of that slap echoed through the private booth like a gunshot in a cathedral. 20 men froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Breathing halted. The sound hung in the air, sharp, definitive, impossible to take back, and in that suspended moment, Sofia Morgan understood that she had just crossed a line from which there was no return. Harold Brennan's face flushed crimson. His jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscles working beneath his skin. He raised his hand to strike her back, but Matteo simply lifted one finger. One. Just that. His eyes locked onto Harold with the weight of 15 years of power, 15 years of men learning that disobedience meant consequences. Do not, Matteo said. His voice was not loud. It was deeper than thunder, solid like an oath carved into stone. Touch her again and I will make sure you spend the rest of your life regretting every breath you take. Harold's hand dropped. Sofia stood trembling, her swollen eye throbbing, the bruises on her throat screaming with each breath. But her voice was steady, shattered glass held together by sheer will. You want to know why I slapped him? Because I am tired. Tired of men thinking they own me. Harold, you, Marco, all of you, you look at me and see a thing you can control. A problem to solve. A debt to collect. She turned to face Matteo directly, and in that moment, something shifted in her spine. You said I remind you of someone who would not quit. So stop trying to save me like I am some broken thing. Let me stand on my own. Matteo touched his reddening jaw. His lieutenants exchanged looks. In 15 years of loyalty and blood and business done in darkness, not one of them had ever seen him smile like that. Not a predator's smile. A real one. Rocco. Franco. Escort Mr. Brennan outside, Matteo said quietly. Gently. And bring me everything. Every contract, every financial record, every communication between Marco and Victoria's organization. Everything. The men moved without hesitation. Harold was lifted from his chair and removed from the booth. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Matteo leaned back, studying Sofia with an intensity that made her breath catch. You are bleeding, he said, gesturing to her split lip. And you are still standing. Most people in your situation would have broken by now. I am not most people, Sofia whispered. No, he agreed. You are not. The pieces fell into place within hours. Marco's loyalty was a performance, a mask worn over ambition. He had sold information to Harold Brennan for $50,000, a sum that meant nothing to Matteo but everything to a man tired of being second. Victoria Ashford, that beautiful vulture with her charity galas and her society friends, had orchestrated the entire arrangement. She needed Sofia to be leverage. A way to make Matteo vulnerable, to expose him to law enforcement, to create an opening for Victoria's rise. They had miscalculated. They had assumed Sofia was fragile. They had not expected her to slap a man in front of 20 witnesses. That night, Sofia stood on the roof of her apartment building. The humid August air pressed down like a suffocating hand. Rain was beginning to fall again, cold drops that stung her split lip and ran down her bruised throat. The city spread below her, Philadelphia's lights blurred through tears she could no longer hold back. Her phone showed $193 in her account. A failed nursing exam she had missed because of her injuries. An eviction notice taped to her apartment door. 17 missed calls from Harold's associates. The weight of it, the impossible, crushing weight of survival, pressed down on her chest until breathing felt like drowning. She walked to the edge of the roof. The railing was cold metal beneath her palms. 20 stories below, the street was empty except for a few late-night cars moving through the darkness like ghosts. The internal monologue came like poison. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe I am just a liability. Maybe everyone around me gets hurt because I am too stubborn to quit. Maybe it would be better if I just stopped fighting. Maybe everyone would be better off. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The rain fell harder. Her hands gripped the railing. Her eyes closed. One step would be so easy. One step and all of this would end, the debt, the pain, the fear, the endless cycle of survival on $90 a week. Then her phone buzzed. One text. From Matteo, you slapped me in front of 20 men and I have never respected anyone more. Do not quit now. One sentence. 8 words. It was enough. Sofia stepped back from the edge. She sat down on the wet concrete and cried, not the silent tears of her nightly routine, but deep, body-shaking sobs that purged something poison from her chest. The rain mixed with her tears until she could not tell where one ended and the other began. She looked at her phone again. At those 8 words. At the man who had seen her at her worst and had not turned away. She texted back, I won't. 12 men in black moved through Philadelphia that night like ghosts moving through a city of the living. They wore suits that cost more than Sofia earned in 6 months. Their vehicles were silent, professional, efficient. Rocco led the team to Harold Brennan's office, a dingy building in South Philadelphia, 3 stories of financial exploitation and broken lives. They did not knock. Harold was at his desk, counting money, when the door imploded inward. He tried to run. Rocco caught him by the collar and slammed him against the wall so hard the photographs fell from their hooks. Harold's bravado evaporated like morning dew. Matteo walked in slowly, deliberately, like a man soothing a lost child. His coat was cashmere, worth more than Harold's annual salary. His shoes were Italian leather. His watch was solid gold. Every detail was designed to communicate one message: you are outmatched. You put your hands on someone under my protection, Matteo said, his voice like ice water. You made a deal with my nephew to betray me. You threatened an innocent woman for a debt that was not hers to bear. He placed the final notice letter on the desk, that same letter that had been slammed down in the restaurant booth. This ends now. Harold's voice cracked like breaking glass. I was just doing my job. I have a family. I have? You have choices, Matteo interrupted. He dropped a folder on the desk. It landed with the weight of a death sentence. Inside this folder is every illegal loan you have ever made. Every forged signature. Every threat you made. Every payment you accepted that was not legal. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division receives this folder in exactly 1 hour unless you do something different. Harold's hands trembled as he opened the folder. His face went the color of ash. You will sign a statement clearing Sofia Morgan of all debt, Matteo continued. You will confess to loan fraud, extortion, and racketeering. You will transfer every asset you have seized illegally back to the people you stole from. And you will pray that the courts are merciful, because if they are not, if you ever contact her again, if you ever even think her name in anger, I will personally ensure that mercy becomes impossible. Harold signed. His hand shook so badly he could barely hold the pen, but he signed. By dawn, federal agents arrived at his office. By noon, the charges were filed. By week's end, the trial began. 40 years. Federal prison. The kind of time that erases a man from the world of the living. Victoria Ashford prepared for her weekly charity gala with the precision of a woman who owned the world. Her dress was Valentino, red as arterial blood. Her diamonds were from Tiffany's, real ones, not costume pieces. Her smile was perfection as she greeted Philadelphia's elite, judges, lawyers, socialites, the people whose approval validated her existence. She was scheduled to receive the Community Excellence Award. The cameras were positioned. The live television feed was ready to broadcast her triumph across the region. Victoria stood on stage, her hand clasping the Crystal Award, her face radiant with victory. I am so grateful, she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion, for this recognition of my commitment to. The screens behind her flickered. Then they showed security footage. High definition. Crystal clear. Her face, meeting with Marco in a private restaurant booth. Her voice, unmistakable, Matteo has gone soft. We use the delivery girl to destroy his credibility, then I take his territory. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Victoria's smile froze. The award fell from her hands and shattered on the stage. She turned to run, but more footage was already playing, her paying Harold Brennan $50,000 in cash. Her discussing how to eliminate the distraction. Her laughing about Sofia's medical debt as if it were a joke. Then Marco appeared on the screens, Marco, broken and pleading, his confession spilling out in detail that could not be denied. He had become convinced that the only way to survive Matteo's justice was to betray Victoria first. He had cooperated with federal investigators. He had recorded every conversation. He had preserved every piece of evidence. Reporters swarmed the stage. Victoria's security team formed a barrier, but there was nowhere to hide. Her own friends turned away from her, their expression shifting from admiration to disgust in seconds. By morning, her assets were frozen. Her bank accounts were seized. Every illegal transaction was exposed. The charity she founded was revealed to be a tax evasion scheme. The women she claimed to help sued her for fraud. Her society friends released statements condemning her. Her family disowned her publicly. Victoria Ashford was arrested at her penthouse as she attempted to flee to the airport. Conspiracy. Racketeering. Attempted murder. The charges stacked like dominoes. Her fall was not quick. It was not merciful. It was systematic, public, total, the kind of destruction that made every lesson permanent. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. And in the aftermath of that night, when the guilty had been erased from the spaces they occupied, when justice had been served not with bullets but with the precise machinery of law and exposure, Sofia Morgan stood at the intersection of two worlds, the poverty she had known and the possibility she had earned. She did not know yet that everything was about to transform. She did not know that Matteo was making phone calls that would change the rest of her life. She did not know that love was about to arrive in the form of a man who had spent 15 years alone, waiting for someone brave enough to slap darkness in the face and still stand. But she was learning. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, she was learning that invisible girls can become visible. That survivors can become builders. That the smallest acts of defiance against cruelty are the most powerful forces in any room. 1 week had passed since the silence shattered in Restaurant Luciano's private booth. 1 week since Sofia Morgan's palm had crossed the face of a man who commanded armies with a whisper. 1 week since everything changed, and nobody who was there that night could explain it yet. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped beneath her apartment door while she slept. She found it stepping over the wet towels from her shower, the one she hung to dry because her dryer had been broken for 3 months. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were certified checks. Not one check. 17 of them. Each one made out to a different creditor. Each one signed with the precision of a man accustomed to moving money like chess pieces. $300,000. Her vision blurred. The numbers refused to settle into meaning. She sat on the edge of her bed and read the note 3 times, her lips forming words she could not yet believe. You saved yourself. This just made it official. Matteo. 2 days later, Sofia walked across the stage at Temple University's graduation ceremony. The auditorium hummed with the sound of 1,000 people clapping, but she heard only silence, the kind that comes when a life pivots on its axis and refuses to spin backward. She wore a borrowed cap and gown that fit her like borrowed armor. When they called her name, she climbed those steps, took her diploma, and felt the weight of every night shift, every cold dinner eaten standing over the sink, every moment she had refused to believe the world was finished with her. She had passed the nursing exam on her 2nd attempt. The margin was not comfortable, but it was absolute. That evening, Sofia went to Restaurant Luciano. Not the front entrance where tourists and business people ordered overpriced pasta and left unsatisfied. She went to the back entrance, the one where deliveries arrived, where the real work happened in kitchens that smelled like rosemary and garlic and the sweat of men who understood precision. Franco was waiting. He did not speak, just nodded toward the hallway that led to the private booth. His face carried something she had never seen before, softness, like a man watching a story he did not know he was a part of. Matteo sat alone. The booth was empty except for him, a glass of red wine untouched in front of him, and the weight of 1,000 decisions that had led to this moment. When she approached, he did not stand. He waited. She sat across from him the way she had sat the night she slapped him, as if she had been falling and finally found a solid place to land. I cannot accept this, she said, placing the envelope on the table between them. Her voice was steady. It was the voice of someone who had learned that accepting help and accepting defeat were not the same thing. He slid the envelope back toward her without breaking eye contact. It is not a gift. It is payment for what you taught me. Sofia waited. The restaurant hummed with distant kitchen sounds, the scrape of a spatula, water boiling, the rhythm of survival. That night you slapped me, he continued, and his voice carried something raw, something that had been buried deep and was now climbing toward daylight. You did what I could not do 15 years ago when Noah stopped breathing. You acted when everyone else froze. You showed me that courage is not about power. It is about refusing to be silent when silence would be easier. He paused. His hands were large, scarred, capable of terrible things. They trembled slightly as they rested on the table. You saved me from becoming someone who hides in power because he is afraid to feel anything. Sofia reached across the table. Her hand was small against his. It was the hand of a woman who had delivered food on a broken scooter. It was the hand of a woman who had survived. She took his hand, and neither of them spoke for a long moment because some things cannot be explained in words. Some things only live in the space between two people who understand that darkness is not conquered by running from it. You stopped your convoy in a thunderstorm for a stranger because your son died 15 years ago and you still see him everywhere, she said quietly. You are not hiding. You are surviving. Just like me. Rocco and Franco watched through the kitchen window, their shoulders leaning against the stainless steel counter, their expressions shifting from confusion to understanding to something that looked almost like hope. In 15 years of working for Matteo Calabrese, they had never seen him cry. But they were seeing it now, tears on the face of the most powerful man in Philadelphia, and beside him, a woman who had earned the right to witness it. 3 days later, Matteo brought her to his penthouse. The elevator rose 42 floors above the city. Philadelphia spread below them like a kingdom of glass and light. But Matteo did not stop at the main floor. He continued upward. To the nursery. The door was painted baby blue. It had been sealed for 15 years, untouched, a tomb of grief that had calcified into routine. He opened it slowly. Sofia stepped inside and felt the temperature drop, the air thick with all the things that had not been allowed to happen. A crib with Noah carved into the headboard. A changing table still arranged as if someone would arrive at any moment to use it. Toys in a basket. Picture books with uncracked spines. A mobile shaped like clouds, hanging still, gathering dust. Sofia did not offer empty comfort. She did not say that everything would be okay, that time heals all wounds, that he should try to move on. Those were the lies people told because they were afraid of the truth. Instead, she stood beside him and spoke from the ruins of her own history. "My mother died when I was 12, she said quietly. I still set a place for her at Christmas. Grief does not go away. It just becomes part of who we are." Matteo looked at her. In that moment, he was not a mafia boss commanding empires. He was a man who had spent 15 years alone in a room with his worst night, and he was being asked to believe that loneliness was optional. "How do you keep going?" he asked. She smiled. It was exhausted, real, bone-deep honest. "I remember that she would have slapped me if I quit." He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from deep in the belly when a person believes, even for a moment, that the world might be survivable. It was the sound of two people who had found each other in the darkness and decided not to look away. 3 months later, Sofia walked across another stage. This time, the auditorium was filled with people she had chosen, Matteo in the front row with Rocco and Franco beside him, 3 men in tailored suits watching a woman in a cap and gown prove that surviving is not the same as living. She had graduated top of her class. The margin was not comfortable. But it was absolute. She moved to a different apartment, not the one Matteo offered, the penthouse suite with a view of the whole city. She chose a small 2-bedroom in a neighborhood where nurses lived and teachers lived and people who worked hard for small paychecks lived. She painted the walls soft yellow. She bought used furniture from estate sales. She refused to let him pay for everything because she had learned that accepting help and accepting himself for what he was were not the same thing. She started working at Philadelphia General Hospital on the night shift. 12 hours, every night, saving lives the way she had learned to save her own. On weekends, she still delivered food for extra money, old habits ground into her bones, unable to shake the feeling that stability could vanish in seconds. But on sticky August nights when thunder rolled across the city like a warning, she and Matteo would sit in Restaurant Luciano's private booth and remember the worst nights of their lives, when a woman slapped a mafia boss and everything changed. Matteo had stepped back from some operations. Not all of them. He was not a man who could simply disappear into legitimate business overnight. But he had started a foundation in Noah's name for mothers in crisis, women who could not afford surgery, women who could not make their rent, women whose invisible suffering had made them invisible to the world. The foundation gave them money, support, and the message that someone was watching, someone cared, someone believed they were worthy of salvation. They were not a fairy tale. He still commanded respect through fear in certain circles. She still moved through the world with the posture of someone expecting it to crumble. But they had learned to build something together in the spaces between their respective darknesses. And so here is the truth that no one understood until it was too late. Sofia Morgan had $200 and a diploma and the knowledge that she had earned her own survival. Matteo Calabrese had an empire and a foundation and the knowledge that power without mercy is just cruelty given permission. But on the night she slapped him in front of everyone, they both learned the most dangerous lesson of all, that the smallest act of defiance against cruelty is the most powerful force in any room. That darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting anyway, even when your hands are shaking, even when the whole world tells you to be quiet, even when staying silent would be easier. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story of defiance, darkness, and the people who refuse to let it win. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Sofia's position? We will see you in the next one.